So we know that we have this make file here that does a lot of really useful things. And one of the things that we can do with it as well is add a lint step here. And let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to add a step here that says lint. And what's nice about this lint step is that I can actually go through here and make it do something interesting. Like, for example, make sure that the syntax of my code is exactly the way I'd like it to be. And I could put in some boilerplate code here that does that. So let's go ahead and run this in and paste this in. So this says pylint disable some irritating warnings and lint my code. Let's go ahead and run this make lint. Great. Now this one says that there's actually a issue with no value argument for color and function call. Now this is something that happens because we're using a very fancy framework. So what I can do is I know that this is something that's specific to click, and so I don't need to check for that. I can just add this in. Like basically we don't want to care about that error. Let's go ahead and run it again. And now we see that there's one more error. We can go ahead and run that one as well. So we can basically get rid of a couple of these linting errors that are specific to the click framework. And this is a way to customize my lint. Perfect. Okay, so this is ready to go here. Now let's go ahead and intentionally break this file by adding an undeclared variable. So I'm going to go here and say var equal. And if I go ahead and I say make lint again, great, it doesn't work. So we can see that this is a nice tool here that's set up that protects us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this broken for a second, and I'm going to do a get pull. There we go. And I'm going to make sure that this application is able to work with something called Github Actions. And you can see what it says there. It says .github actions. So let's go ahead and do a get status and add in the rest of these files. And let's go here, say get add test. Let's go ahead and add the make file. And then we'll switch over to Github Actions, which will automatically run everything when we check in our code. And this is the culmination of a continuous integration step. So let's go ahead and add make steps as the message. Perfect. Okay, now that this is set up, what I'll do is I'll go back to this, refresh it, look at my repo, and you can see that I have this thing called Github Workflow set up. So this is something that is part of GitHub now. And what it does is allows me to run automatic commands when I go through and I run some code. So I'm gonna actually go back to my code here and look at this GitHub workflow. That's just a kind of a hello world workflow. And I'm gonna tweak this a little bit. So what I'll do is I will replace it with a slightly more complex action that will automatically lint my code, test my code every single time I make a change to this repo. And I can even edit it right inside of here. So go here and run through this. So I'll just kind of paste this out here. And you can see that GitHub Actions has featured actions like caching. It'll cache artifacts. It can build artifacts. It can set up different environments. And you can run many different GitHub Actions. So really it's like a robot that's sitting in the cloud ready to run our code for us. So in this case, you can see that it sets up Python 3.8. Now I know that the version that's probably the most backwards compatible for Azure could be Python 3.5. And so let's actually downgrade that so that we use Python 3.5. And you can see that this will run on Ubuntu, so that looks pretty good. And I have a make install, which was something that I had set up earlier in my project. We have a lint, which we just tested, which should fail when I check it in. We also have a test, which we know should work. This format code section, for now, I don't need it, so maybe I'll just take that out. I can try that later if I needed to. There we go. So I got a nice series of actions here that'll happen every single time I make a change to my project. So let's go ahead and start a commit, and we can say making lint test and install work. There we go. And I'll go ahead and commit this. And what happens now is that from this time going forward, my code will automatically run these actions. And so it's like a robot that's behind the scenes, checking my code, making sure that everything's set up, installing it, making sure the packages work. So it's an incredibly useful tool that comes with GitHub. Now, I know that the lint was going to fail here, and in fact, it stops because once you fail one part of the process, it'll just stop and give you the error message. So we know that, in fact, in this case, it's a variable that's a problem, and we know it even says that it's on line 2 and it's character 5. I can actually just fix this right inside of my repository. So I'm going to go to that hello file, and I'm going to edit it right here, and I'm going to just delete this, right? Because we know that that's bad code, and we don't want bad code in our project. So let's go ahead and fix undeclared variable. And this whole feedback loop is so powerful because it's integrated right inside of the browser, and I don't necessarily have to do this inside of Visual Studio Code. I can, and I can push the changes, but what's great about this is that instantly I get a feedback loop. And this, again, is part of this concept of continuous integration, continuous improvement, always making things better, always checking to make sure that our project works. And look, now that this lint process is failed here, it says format strings are only supported in Python 3.6 or greater. So it caught a different bug for us, which is really powerful. So how would we fix this? Well, what we could do is we could go back again to our code, or into our GitHub Actions project here, and we could look at this runtime here, and we could go through and change it so that it runs with a newer version of Python. And this also shows the power of something like GitHub Actions, is that let's maybe go back to Python 3.8, and this might be a call that I would need to go to my manager or my team and say, look, we just discovered that the new version of Python that we're using that uses the fstring method, it only supports Python 3.6 or higher, and we tested that out with GitHub Actions. So how do we actually go through and maybe modify what we were trying to do? And so then again, I check one more piece of code here. I run this in GitHub Actions, and it will now go through and pass our lint. So incredibly useful to have a tool like this that can check things behind the scenes, both the Python runtime, the linting, the testing of your code. And so it's just constantly making everything better. So great, that all works. And so probably the final step that I would do, what I like to do in these is as I create a status badge, and then it will make some markdown file here, code. And then I just go back to my project and then go to the README and just paste it in. Right, so now I've got actually a badge that shows everybody in my team what's happening with my project. And what's great about this is, there we go. We can see, and this will highlight whether it failed or whether it was successful. And then I can toggle back to my other project. And what I can do is I can do a get pull. And remember, before we had a failure. Now if I say make lint, we can see that our code is actually working. So really powerful workflow to be able to toggle back and forth, make sure that GitHub Actions is always keeping my project nice and friendly and clean. And then also I can look at this GitHub Actions status badge here, and everybody else on my team can use that as a communication method. And so this is also ties into our technical communication methodology.